A number of years ago, there was a wonderful movie called E.T. Any of you remember it? It stands for the extraterrestrial. And there's a very moving scene in that movie where this little creature from outer space, though he has been inhabiting our world for a period of time, more than anything else, he wants to go home. He just wants to go home. And there's a picture where he is standing there, and they're trying to make a telephone call, if I remember it correctly. And somehow they get a connection. He has this little finger pointed. Remember that finger had a big bulb on the end of it. And he's able to articulate the word home. I think that is a very powerful word. It's a very evocative word. It's a word that can fill your heart with gladness. It can fill your heart with laughter. And sometimes it fills your heart with tears. At this time of the year, as we are entering into Advent, a lot of people are thinking about home. Some are making plans to be with their families and their friends over the holiday season. And it's going to be a wonderful time for people to gather together. A number of years ago, there was a wonderful song that was written. It's really old, but I hear it every Christmas. This song that was sung by Bing Crosby and a number of others. And we're going to actually sing it this morning. And these are the words. I'll be home for Christmas. You can count on me. Please have snow and mistletoe and presents on the tree. So Chuck's going to come and lead us in this. And we're going to sing it together. It's better than me singing it alone. I could do that at the end and we can empty the place. That's good enough. I'll be home for Christmas. You can count on me. Please have snow and mistletoe and presents on the tree. Christmas Eve will find me where the love light gleams. I'll be home for Christmas if only in my dream. And you see, if you think of the words of that, it's very moving, isn't it? People wanting just to be home for Christmas. And some are saying, even if I can't be there, I'll be there in my thoughts or in my dreams, and my presence will be experienced even that way. Being home for Christmas is a very powerful experience for all of us. But there's another side that for some people going home isn't so positive. We know that there are homes where there is brokenness, where there is strife, there is bitterness, and it's really a painful place for some people to be. You know, it's interesting, the Bible says a lot about home and our longing for home. I was wondering, why do we have this strong desire within us to be home? And so this morning we're going to focus upon what it means to be home with God. And this morning, if you've never experienced that sense of intimacy of being at home with God, there's going to be an opportunity for you to be able to come home to Him today. As we think about it, there's a question that we often ask, and that is, so why do we long for home? When you think about your home and your background, it has been the place where all of us have been shaped in a variety of ways. Our home is the place where we receive our identity. And sometimes when we meet people, they ask us the question, so where are you from? Or where do you call home? And what they're really asking us is this question: what makes your home home? What makes your identity so significant? You see, that's wonderful about being at home. Our home is more than just soft, comfortable chairs in the living room or sitting out on a beautiful deck in the backyard on a summer evening. Our home is so significant and important because it's the people who are there that make it home. We can have a house, but we might not really have a home. When we go back to the Old Testament, we find in the very first book, the book of Genesis, that God created the first home, and he called it the Garden of Eden. And as we look at that place, it was a wonderful place that God had made for his creation. And it was wonderful not because it was so beautiful, and not because it was very fertile, and not because there was an abundance of everything that people could actually want. It was so amazing and wonderful for one simple reason: God was there. God was there in the garden. And we are told that in the cool of the evening, God would walk with Adam and Eve, and he would converse with them. But when Adam and Eve fell away from God, and when they chose to go their own way, they had to leave the garden. They were banned from the garden. They had lost their home. And we're not home yet, because the decision of our first parents has impacted every single one of us in every single generation. And all around us, we find people who are homeless. In fact, we're all homeless if we think about it in a biblical sense. For a number of years, I have been somewhat involved and connected with some of the downtown missions in Toronto, whether it's been Evangel Hall, or whether it has been Yonge Street Mission or the Scott Mission. And one of the things that I found really intriguing as I got to know folks down there are a number who would live on the streets, some who would live under bridges, some who lived in some type of housing. But it didn't really seem to matter to them too much about those things. What mattered to them most was the fact that they could somehow connect with other people. And sometimes I got to know them on a first-name basis, and I heard their story. And as I would go down to these missions, they would often want to come and talk to you and just share a bit about their life. In the Bible, there are many stories about people. And I want to introduce you just briefly to a homeless man in the Bible. You probably know his name really well. He's called Moses. And when you think about it, he was born in a period of time when his family were slaves in Egypt. So he was born as the son of a slave, and he himself was a slave. He was born during a very difficult period in history because in that culture there was a genocide, and they were taking the lives of all young baby boys. And his mother took him and hid him amongst the reeds, placed him in a waterproof basket in the Nile River. He was discovered by the daughter of the Pharaoh, who took this little baby and raised him as an orphan in the court of Pharaoh. Later, as he grew up as a prince of Egypt, he saw one of his own countrymen being beaten, and he took the life of an Egyptian. And as a result of that, he became a fugitive, and for the next 40 years, he is living in the desert of Midian, a homeless man again. And then on the backside of that desert, God appears to him through a burning bush experience. And he tells him, Moses, you are to leave this place, and you are going to be the leader that will take my people out of slavery and bring them to the promised land. And for the next 40 years, God shows Moses day after day the way that he is to go. But the interesting thing about Moses' life is that he himself never gets to enter the promised land. He never gets to go home. And so he's the one who wrote the psalm that we read this morning. And this psalm are the words of a homeless man. Just think about these words. Lord, you have been our dwelling place throughout all generations. This is the cry of a homeless person. He is simply saying, God, you are our home. Because we know that a home is not about a house. It's not about furnishings. It's not about living in a certain town that we might call our place of residence. But home is where God is. And so he goes on to say, before the mountains were born, you brought forth the world, and from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. But think of those first words, Lord, you have been our dwelling place. You are our home throughout all generations. You see, our longing for home is really our longing for God. So we can sing the song, I'll be home for Christmas. And we're not thinking about, I got to get to that house on that street with those certain decorations. No, we're saying, I've got to get to that place where I'm loved and cared for and where I belong and where I have a sense of identity. And our longing for home is really our longing for God. It's our longing to be loved. It's our longing to be wanted. It's our longing to be secure. It's our longing just to be protected. This is the inner desire of every single person. It was St. Augustine who said, our hearts are restless or our hearts are empty, O God, until you satisfy that deepest need of every single person. But there's a little problem. And the problem is, I would like to have all of this, but very often I don't want God interfering in my life. I don't want God interfering and telling me what I need to do. I really don't want God's authority over my life. I want to be at home, but there's a part of me that doesn't want to be at home. And I get caught in the midst of this. Have you ever tried to run away from home? Some of you might have, taken your little belongings, put it on a stick, and walked down the street as a kid. I actually anticipated this when I was 18 years of age. My father and I were having a fairly major disagreement. I won't go into the details, except to say I lost. And I was thinking about, I'm out of here. But I had enough smarts to go down to the bank first. And I had my bank account checked. And as I did the numbers and thought about the possible expenses it was going to cost me to be out on my own, I decided maybe I better stay home for a little bit longer. So I didn't run away, but I thought about it. In reality, we're probably never too old to run away from home. There are times when I want God, but I don't want God. I want to be safe, I want to be loved, I want to be protected, but when you think about it, in one sense, we're all runaways. The prophet Isaiah said it in these words, all we like sheep have gone astray, or we could say have run away, and all of us have turned to our own way. We've wanted to do our own thing. Have you ever thought of yourself as a runaway from God? Well, there's a well-known story in the Gospels about a runaway. A father had 2 sons, and for a long time, the youngest son kept thinking about not wanting to be at home. He wanted to be out of that place. And so he said to his dad, can you give me all that which is going to be rightfully mine when you're dead? I'd like to have it in advance. And his dad gives him his entire inheritance. And we know the story how he goes and he spends it all. And pretty soon he is poverty-stricken. He is homeless, literally. He has to eat with the pigs and sleep wherever he can find shelter. And it is at that point he discovers how miserable he actually is in life. And he wonders, I wonder if my dad would take me back into the house. Would he receive me into the house? I don't think he goes as far as saying, can I be part of the family again? Can I be at home? Could I just have a shelter over my head and food to eat because of the poverty of my life? What this young man doesn't realize is that ever since he has gone, every single day, his father's been looking out the window, waiting and watching for his son to come home. And he sees a familiar figure coming down the road, and the dad knows, that's my son. And he runs to him, and he throws his arms around him, and he welcomes him to the home. That, you see, is grace. That is pure grace. And that's what God's saying to all of us. And though we're far away, all we like sheep have gone astray, when we are coming home, God runs to embrace us. And to all of us, he says, I want you to come home. One day, Jesus was talking to his disciples. It was near the end of his ministry, and he told them, in a period of time, I am going to die, and I will be taken from you. And as they hear this information, the disciples are absolutely devastated. For the previous 3 years, they had been with Jesus. And being with Jesus, they had found a home. Jesus gave them a new sense of identity that they never had before. They had a sense of belonging. He was home. And now he tells them, I'm going to be leaving. And this is what he talks about, because he's going to go to God's home. And Jesus said, in my Father's house are many rooms. The King James Version says, in my Father's house there are many mansions. And I am going there to prepare a place for you. But listen, I will come back and I will take you to be with me. Now, when people have read this, especially in the King James Version, they read, in my Father's house are many mansions. All kinds of ideas run through their mind. I wonder what my mansion will be like. I would like a ranch house. Or maybe I would like a castle. Or I would be satisfied with a cozy little cottage. But the word mansion is not a good translation of that word. The best translation is this one. In my Father's house are many rooms. Now, in Jesus' day, housing arrangements were quite different from the housing arrangements that we often have today. And in that culture, there was a housing structure called an insula. Very simple word. It's a housing arrangement that looked like this. There would be a courtyard. And there was a main house built around this courtyard, and there were rooms that it would extend out from the main house. And what you would discover in this insula is that there could be several generations that actually lived in this place. So, for example, when a young man decided he was going to get married, the marriages in those days were most often arranged. And so they would go and they would negotiate what was called a bridal price. Some people call it a dowry. So the women had to be able to give a dowry to their future spouse. And so this money was often saved up. Now here's the interesting thing. A bride was referred to as she who is bought at a price. So just think about that for a minute, because I'm going to come back to that. She who is bought at a price, because that was the bridal arrangement. Now, a lot of young couples today are getting married. One of the things they do is go house hunting. They think maybe we can afford an apartment, maybe we can buy a condominium, maybe we can buy a single dwelling. I don't know. Everyone's a bit different. But in that culture, you didn't have to house hunt. All they did was added another room to the insula. So remember that courtyard, the main building, other buildings would go off it, rooms. And so when you're getting married, the family would get together and build you a room where you and your future wife would be able to live. This is what Jesus is saying. I am going to my Father's insula, to my Father's house. There are many rooms there. And he's saying, I'm going there to prepare the way for you to be able to come. And the way he went was the way of the cross. The problem is, some of us may not really be prepared to be with the Father right now. In John chapter 14 and in verse 23, Jesus does say these words. If anyone loves me, you will obey my teaching. My Father will love you, and we will come to you and make our home with you. And perhaps we're thinking, Jesus, I'm not ready to be with you yet because I'm not good enough. Maybe I need to clean up my act and straighten around my life. But God says, you can't do enough. Because Jesus can do what I cannot do. And what he can do that I cannot do is to make my heart right before God. So this is what Paul said. You were bought with a price. Do you hear that bridal language? You are bought with a price. So do not become slaves of people. That's why Jesus actually went to the cross. He was going to pay the bridal price so that you and I, the bride of Christ, can come home with the groom. And today, you can say, I would like to come home by saying to Jesus, I understand you went to the cross and that you died in my place to do what I could not do so that my heart could become your home. And so, Jesus, I want to receive your forgiveness, and I want you to come and live in my life. And when we have done that, then we can look forward to the day when he will come back and take us to himself. From the very beginning, God prepared a beautiful home for people to live in. It was the Garden of Eden. And in the end, we will have a new home, which we can call our final home. And John in his revelation gives us an insight into what this home is actually like. He said, I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming out of heaven as a bride, dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, the dwelling of God is with humankind. And God will live with them, and they will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. He invites us to come home. What makes earth our home? What makes heaven our home? In the very beginning, as it is now, and as it will be in the future, is that God is there. God is there. That's the home we long for. This relationship with the living God, which is for right now and forevermore. Do you know if you're home? Do you know that kind of a relationship with God? In a few minutes, we will come to this table. This is the bride price. This is the price that Christ paid to bring us home to the Father's house. And in faith, come and say, Jesus, all I can do is receive your invitation of love. So here is my heart. I give it to you. As we begin this Advent season, the invitation of God is simply this. Come home. Let's pray together.